Hello, everybody, and welcome to our February Roundtable. My name is Leanne Chuboff, Vice President of Technical Affairs, and I will be part of the host for this Roundtable. So our Roundtable today is about how to conduct a risk assessment. So I first want to thank NSF of being our sponsor for this roundtable. We appreciate their support as it relates to SQF and in particularly this roundtable. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time with introductions. If you want to know more about our key facilitator from NSF, Jeff Farrell, I suggest you go to his LinkedIn page. He has quite the history. But I will say that his title is actually Global Senior Technical Manager with NSF. He has a lot of experience, and he's going to share that experience with us today. So Jeff, I'm just going to hand it right over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. Hi, everyone. Welcome to How to Conduct a Risk Assessment. So management, senior management have a responsibility to identify risks and how these risks are mitigated within their facilities. Risk assessment plays a crucial and critical part in identifying and mitigating these strategies and identifying really what the impact to the business is. So today what we're going to do is we're going to follow a little journey. We're going to take a little journey through risk assessment. Just one sec. Our agenda, we're going to define what a risk assessment is. We're going to look at the definition of a risk assessment. We're going to look at a hazard versus a risk. And then we're going to really kind of peel back the cover and look at a risk assessment as it pertains to SQF. So we're really going to kind of dial it into the SQF program, make it applicable. We're going to walk through an example of a risk assessment. And then we're going to do these fun breakout rooms. We're going to break out into 3 different rooms. We're going to have 3 different scenarios that we're going to go through, and we're going to actually go through and walk through a risk assessment in the breakout rooms and see how far we get, see what we come up with at the end of the 25 minutes. So a risk assessment, by definition, it's the process of determining the level of action needed to prevent or eliminate an adverse food safety or quality event, determining the likelihood and severity of an adverse food safety or quality outcome if the planned activities do not occur as expected. So it is essentially the backbone of any functioning food safety system. Risk assessment must be part of your functioning food safety system. Now, a risk assessment is essentially a structured way for you to understand the risks associated with your process. Now, there's many different processes, and I'm probably going to say this many different times, but you need to understand what your process is, what your risks are, and how that relates to your facility, your process. It does not have to be overly complicated or time consuming, and keeping it simple is generally the more effective way to go. But we need to make sure that we clearly identify what our scope is for the risk assessment. We need to have something to start with. We need to identify what that scope is. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to define the scope, identify, assess the hazards. We're going to categorize the risks, and then we're going to control these risks. So the simpler you make it, the more effective it usually is. Identify, assess, and control. So a hazard versus a risk. A hazard is a factor that may lead to undesirable effects. A substance present in a food that has the ability or the potential to cause adverse health effects to the consumer. And a lot of these that we're aware of are those microbiological, the physical, the chemical hazards that we assess within our HACCP programs, within our food safety programs, within our food safety plans. A risk, it refers to the probability of these hazards occurring in your facility. It looks at the consideration of the likelihood of consumption and the nature of severity posed by the hazard. So we're looking at the big picture here. We're looking at, number one, what is the hazard? And then what's the likelihood and severity of that hazard happening in your facility? And then you're connecting that to your program. You're connecting that to, well, we've mitigated this hazard and this risk by doing this, 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 and this. So that's really where we're going. We're following a journey, we're connecting dots. So we're looking at hazard and risk. Now we're going to dive into what is severity, what's likelihood. So severity versus likelihood. So we're, when we talk severity and likelihood, we're looking at a risk matrix. We're looking at many different risk matrix. And this is where the comment comes with the keeping it simple is generally better. So you can see the two examples on the right-hand side. These are risk matrix. They're not identical. They're not the same. In fact, we've got the top one has a 5x5 grid where they've identified the severity from insignificant, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic. The likelihood follows a rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain, and they've applied a number to it. Whereas the bottom one, it's a little simpler, and they've switched it around. They put the likelihood on the opposite axis of the first one. Keep it simple, make it applicable to your program. That's the key to this. So the bottom one you look at, they've identified their likelihood a little bit differently than they did up top. So they've got remote, possible, highly likely, and then the severity, they've got mild, moderate, and severe. So two different matrices, the exact same thing we're talking about. So severity is essentially how bad is the outcome likely to be? Likelihood, what are the chances of this outcome happening? And we put it into that grid. So when we're talking risk matrix, we want to clearly define what we're looking at. So when we're looking at severity and likelihood criteria, we need to understand what that is. We need to understand what those criteria for likelihood are. So this one here, I created it in Excel. It's not as pretty as the other ones, but I wanted to make it very simple, and it didn't take very long at all. But what I've done is I've taken it, I put likelihood and severity there. For severity, I've created mild, moderate, and severe. But now what I'm looking at is mild is equated to failure of whatever is unlikely to pose an immediate risk to the customer. So that's what unlikely is. And that double X is essentially what our scope is looking at, what are hazards or what risks we're looking at within the scope of our risk assessment. Moderate failure of double X is unlikely to pose an immediate risk to the consumer, but repeated failure may be a potential risk. So initially, you know what, if it happens once, it's mild. If it continues to happen or repeatedly happens, then you know what, we gotta ramp that up. It's got to become a moderate risk. And then we're looking at it from a different perspective than the mild. And then the severe is if we have a failure, it's likely to lead to an immediate health impact or recall. Now, flipping it over and looking at the likelihood, what I've decided to choose is unlikely, possible, and likely. You can choose whatever you want. You can put whatever words you want for severity and likelihood, but you must clearly define it. So looking at the likelihood, unlikely, that seems pretty straightforward. Failure is unlikely to happen or rare. Possible, failure can happen, but not too frequently. And likely, failure is likely to happen often frequent. And that goes back to the original comment. Keep it simple. This is simple. This is very easy to understand. The words themselves in the risk matrix pretty much tell the story. So keep it simple. Don't make it too complex. The goal here is to identify the risk and put it through a risk matrix, and then clearly define what your outcome is. So now we've looked at it from a risk and likelihood, severity. We've gone through all of that. Now we need to identify all of those little squares. What does low risk mean? What does medium risk mean? What does high risk mean? And the two examples that I chose were cleaning frequency and audit frequencies. These are two fairly easy ones to kind of walk through the example. Again, it's different for every facility, but based on the scope that we choose, this is what we do. We need to clearly define an outcome. So what we've done, so cleaning frequencies, the scope could be, can we change our cleaning frequency for something? So low risk, if we go through and we assess the severity and the likelihood and it comes out low risk, what does that mean to us? That means we're going to move the cleaning frequency to monthly. Medium is we're going to move it to weekly. High risk, we're going to move it to daily. Audit frequencies, same thing. So we move from low risk, we're going to audit at 12 months. This could be your glass and brittle plastic. Medium risk, we could look at 6 months, high risk, 3 months. That's our criteria. So now what we've done is we've defined what our likelihood and severity are. We've defined what our risk matrix is going to tell us based on our investigation of our risk assessment. So this walk through the risk assessment, now we have all the tools in place. Now we've got everything kind of thrown in here. We're ready. We're ready to walk through our example of this. So now what we're going to do, we're going to throw it all into a bowl. We're going to mix it all up. We're ready to do our risk assessment. So we've got the basics now. Where do we start? How do we start this? We start with the hazards and the risks. So some of the questions that you can ask, remember, we've got to have a scope statement. The scope statement has to be clear. We want the scope statement to identify this is what we're looking at. Once we have that, now we're going to look for hazards and risks. So how do we start that process? What are some of the questions that we would ask? What is the potential for product contamination? How is the product currently protected? How likely are we to ship contaminated product? Is there a visible measure to identify contaminated product? How effective are the controls that we have in place? What is the reason for changing, reducing our policy and procedure? And this is important that we look at this. So we always need to have a reason. That's why we're always driven by scope. That's our key driving factor. Clarity in what we're looking at. If we don't have a scope, we don't have clarity, we're running in the dark. It's like you might as well throw a dart at the risk assessment and say, you know what, the dart came on high risk, so this is what the result is going to be. As an auditor, I'm not going to accept that. I need to understand what your journey through this risk assessment was, and that you've followed it and you've educated it, you've gone through, you've assessed it. The last two, and these are very important. Is there a chance for food safety to be compromised by doing this? Sometimes what we see in risk assessments is there a deviation. We're deviating from a best practice. We're deviating from an SQF code requirement, and we have to ask the question, is food safety compromised? Can it be compromised? The second part of that question is the very last one. These are very, very important. Is will an exclusion affect any other areas of the food safety program? You've built this big, huge food safety machine. You're driving forward. If you pull the bolt out of the wheel and the wheel falls off by making a deviation or a change without looking at the big picture, something else, unintended consequences, I think is probably the best way to describe it, is unintended consequences happen. And this is when we run into recalls. This is when we run into that foreign material. Somebody gets hurt. Somebody gets really hurt. So it's important to understand that a risk assessment is very important to understand, are we compromising food safety by doing this? Are there any other effects to our food safety program? Make sure you're connecting the dots. That's vital to succeeding within a risk assessment. So now we're going to move on to severity. So we've looked at severity. Again, we want to make sure we're asking all the questions. We're identifying all of the possible things we can. So what would happen if the contaminated food is ingested? Have we considered all groups, allergies, small children, elderly? Have we considered all of these groups in our look at severity? Is it likely to cause serious harm, death, etc.? So this is important that we focus on these, that we've got a clear picture so that we can succinctly put our severity where it should be. So we're not missing on, you know what, I really want to move this to a daily, so let's just put it as low, and then away we go. Low, away we go. That's not, we do not want that mantra. No way. That is definitely not a catchphrase, but it is something that we want to keep in mind. Likelihood. So how do we start on likelihood? So again, we're adding to this. How likely is it to occur? That's a simple question. That's an obvious question. But if we look at it from what is the ease at which this can happen intentionally? Have you looked at intentional contamination or intentional whatever it is based on your scope. Have there been any recalls that have caused adverse effects for facilities that are doing this? Is there any history in our facility? Do we have any history with a supplier that may bump this likelihood up? So you can see with all of these questions, everything, we're really investigating. We're putting all of this stuff into that bowl. We're kind of mixing it around. We're getting a very clear picture of what our scope looks like, what that scope looks like. And then, you know, we're going to take that step back and we're going to evaluate all this information within our risk matrix and come out with the outcome. And we're going to take that outcome and we're going to assess it per what we've defined as it is. So if it's low, medium, high, if it's medium, then we take the medium and off we go, because that's what we defined prior to starting this risk assessment. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to take a very short journey through a risk assessment sample. Now I'm going to put a little bit disclaimer. I understand every facility is different. There's wet, there's dry, there's high risk, there's low risk, there's ready to eat, all of these. What I've done here is, and I've put together an example for the sake of walking through what we've just gone through, for taking that data and showing you how we take some of this data, we put it in the bowl, and then we walk through it. So I understand it's, you know, it's one of those crazy things. What happens if, what if, there's always going to be a what if. And those what ifs are always answered by you at your facility, because you're the expert at your facility. But for an example purposes, this risk assessment example, we're walking through to show you kind of an example of how we would go through and do all of this stuff. So the example that I chose, and this, again, it's a little bit controversial, I understand. Does pallet racking need to be 18 inches from the outside wall? So I understand that this is not prescriptive to the SQF code. I understand that, you know, there's no mention of this anywhere in the code, but this is what I chose. Now, my scope, I chose, can we move the pallets closer to the wall to have more storage space in the warehouse? So I'm thinking about a scenario where, you know, management comes to you and says, look, you know what, Jeff, we've got way too much. We need more space. We want to move the pallets against the wall. Can we do that? And now I'm taking my risk assessment tool out. I'm undoing it. I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to look at that and I'll get back to you. And so I started originally with the risks. So we're always kind of focused on that microbiological physical. We're taking it into this. This is essentially a deviation, right? We want to deviate from what we're currently doing within our food safety system. We want to move them closer, and we want to move them closer because we need more room, right? It's not necessarily a food safety reason. We want to move it closer. But as a reasonable QA manager, I'm saying to senior management, you know what? Let's have a look at that and look at the risks and the records and see where we get to. So the first thing I do is look at it from a, you know, what would happen if, what are some of the potential risks? So one of them, not able to clean behind the pallets. So there's potential for buildup. There's potential for pest infestation in the pallets stored by the wall that we couldn't see. There's potential for product buildup and even contaminated products. So these are big risks. These are big things that could potentially happen to our process. And this is where that little asterisk comes in. So if you're a wet facility versus a dry facility, your risks are going to be a little bit different here. If you're a ready to eat facility versus a low risk facility, again, your risks are different here, and you'll probably add on to these, but these are the, honestly, I'm taking the obvious ones, right? I picked the obvious ones for this demonstration. Now, what I'm doing with this is I'm taking the risks and I'm attaching it to my food safety program that I currently have. So GMP audits, have we had any instances of spills that were noted in GMP audits? Have we had any instances where we've had pest control catches or pests running around? So we're going to look at our GMP audits. We're going to look at our master sanitation schedule and say, hey, you know what? This is This is supposed to be cleaned every month. I'm looking at the MSS and we haven't cleaned it in 6 months. What's going on? Oh, well, we were 2 or 3 people short, so I had to keep bumping this along because it was only the warehouse, right? All of these things, all of this data that we're collecting from this history, it adds up and up and up. So the risk goes up, right? It's showing that we're not in control of our master sanitation program, or if we've got spills that are noted in the GMP audits or the internal audit, then the risk goes up. That's all of this information I'm taking, I'm throwing it into the bowl. Now we're making a big mixture here. Internal audit, same thing. So we're looking at what was identified in the internal audit. Some of the records can be interviews on the floor for the warehouse people. Complaints, have we got any complaints for broken product, et cetera, et cetera. That's where you want to look as well. And then pest control. Have we had any catches in our tin cats in the warehouse? Have we had increased infestation or anything like that? So we're looking at all of this paperwork to help us with our hazards and our risks and identify where we're going to put this and from a risk perspective. Now we're going to define what our outcome and our decisions are. So again, I like to keep it simple. Low risk, move the pallets directly against the wall. Let's just not worry about it. Off you go. Medium risk, allow the pallet to move closer, but not directly against the wall. And then high risk, pallets can't move. We absolutely can't move. This place is a disaster already. I do not need any more. So once we have our outcome and decisions clarified, everything's clear, we know what it is. Now we're going to get to the meat of the problem here. We're gonna really dive in. We're gonna say, you know what, this is likely to occur because I've seen instances in the records and all of this. So I'm gonna go to the likelihood, I'm gonna go right up to the top to likely, but the severity could be mild. And that's based on some of the things that I saw. So it comes out as medium risk. So we're going to follow that right to the top. We're going to see that it is medium risk. Now, what does medium risk mean? And this is the one where it's important to have your outcomes. There's no turning back now. You've identified the outcomes before, right? There's no changing our mind. So medium risk means pallets cannot be moved right against the outside wall. Can't move them right up, but we can move them within X inches of the outside wall. And I purposely put X there because I do not want to take away of this roundtable. Jeff told me I could go 6 inches from the outside wall or 5 or 9 or whatever. So I put X there for that. So this will allow for cleaning, inspection, and pest control inspections. So this is one of those things where based on the records that we saw, we're kind of in control, but not really. So we put it as a medium risk. It came out as a medium risk. And we've made the changes accordingly. Now, if we're flipping that over and I'm an auditor coming into your facility and saying, you know, hey, I see your pallets are close to the wall. And again, I understand that this is not part of the code, but bear with me. How did you determine how close that was? How did you look at that? Then you can take all of this risk assessment information and drop it in front of the auditor and walk him through that journey that we just had. If I'm an auditor and you say to me, oh, we move them because we're a low risk facility and have no evidence to support that, it becomes a different discussion. It's a much, much different discussion for you and the auditor. So that's our very quick, very simple walk through risk assessment. So now we're going to get to the fun part. Now we're getting to the part where you guys get to participate, where you get to throw out all of your exciting ideas and all of that. We've picked some dandies here. So what we're going to do, breakout room number 1 is going to be stay put here with me. We're going to do zip ties in production. Breakout room number 2, and this is the exciting one. I wish I could go to this one too. We're going to send you with Leanne, and this is alternative methods. This is, can we use air dryers? Because those are questions that we get, right? And then breakout room number 3 is Tammy, and she's going to be dealing with drinking water in production. So we've picked some good ones where we're looking at potentially deviating from the deviating from the code, deviating from the best practices. We're going to look at that and see what we come up with. So let's take a few minutes, pick the room that you really want to go to, and we'll start up in a couple minutes once everybody's settled. Okay, everyone. So welcome to room number 1, door number 1. We have zip ties in food production areas. So this is something that we see quite often. This is one of those ones where you know, can we use zip ties in food production areas? And you know, again, it depends on the industry. What are some of the risks we're looking at? What are some of the things that you would look at from a risk or a hazard perspective?
Actual food contact.
Yep.
Or material risk and coverage of pathogens, because it does allow for a growth niche depending on where it is in the facility.
Exactly. Those are great
Product
ones.
lines.
Yep. Okay, I'm just going to keep some notes here. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so foreign
Yes.
material, pathogen growth. What about anything chemical associated with it? What would you think for that?
I mean, do they leach chemical after time? Are they meant to be near food contact surfaces? Because some industrial zip ties definitely are not meant to be near anybody.
No,
Ever.
you don't see them wrapped around a bun or on a bag or anything like that, for sure. Okay, leach chemicals. What about allergens?
I would put it on some sort of master sanitation sheet to replace them at a certain frequency or inspect them at a certain frequency, depending on risk.
Yeah, that's great. And even go as far as including it in your changeover procedure potentially, right?
Yeah.
If you're moving from one allergen to another, then that could be a serious concern.
They could become a physical hazard if they come apart and fall on the line.
Yes. Yep.
Hazard.
There could be a tendency to use them for temporary repairs.
Yes, for sure. All right, so what would we look at for records? So number one, what would we look at from we're already using them, we want to use them more in our facility. And then secondly, what will we look at from we're going to put them into our facility? What records will we want to beef up to ensure that we're mitigating the risks that are associated with you know, the foreign material, the pathogens, the chemicals, leaching out of them, allergens, etc.
Metal detector records.
Good one. Okay, which assumes that these are metal detectable, right?
Yes.
That's good.
Internal audits.
Customer complaints as well.
Yes. Okay. Metal detector.
Jeff, we're getting pre-op inspection and post-op inspection.
Yep.
In the chat.
There should be maybe a log.
Testing results.
Rotoplasty.
Okay. Good.
Glass, hard plastic contamination.
Yes. Okay.
Logs of locations and when implemented. And
Rotoplastic.
Good. All right. Those are good. Those are good.
Information from the supplier.
Yeah, certificate of compliance for food contact.
Good one. Yes.
Also, you could look at recall records to see if there's ever been a recall associated with that.
Good. Okay, I like that. So now we're looking within, but we're broadening that out. So we're filling up that bowl quite nicely. This is great. I'm typing these things in is why I'm kind of slow here. So what about a risk level? How are we, so let's look at our little chart here. And so what's the severity if somebody eats one of these things? What's the severity of that? And let's look at it from it's just clean and somebody ate it.
The choking hazard?
Yeah, I was going to ask the size.
Yeah, that was my question. How big?
Let's make it a choking hazard, shall we?
Make it a what?
Okay. So
Choking
if-
hazard, yeah.
if it's a choking hazard, then it becomes a moderate or a medium.
I would say moderate.
Oh, hi.
Okay.
It depends.
High
If it's a
risk.
child, it could be high. you know.
Right.
Hi,
Okay.
yeah.
Yep. So let's put this spin on it and say if the severity is if we look at our internal records and we've seen pieces of this come up in GMP audits and internal audits and all of those things, would you lean towards moderate or severe for severity?
If you're seeing pieces,
It would-
severe, yeah, absolutely.
It would definitely push you to severe. And then you're looking at from a likelihood, if you're physically seeing this in your facility, then you're looking at high, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now, we've established it as high risk. We're gonna actually take a step back and look at outcomes. So this is that part where if it's low risk, we're going to use the zip ties in production, right?
Mhm.
If it's medium risk, what would we do? What would you do for medium risk?
Increase inspection reports, increase.
Yeah, you can still use it. You just have to-
Use metal detectable ones, maybe make that as a
Good.
requirement.
Okay. Yep.
Use them in production, but not over top of product.
Yep. That's good. That's really good. Okay. So, and then high risk, we're just not going to use them, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Because of what we just discussed. It's that the choking hazard and all of those things, right? We want to make sure that that we're controlling or mitigating the risk within our facility to do that. So those are our three outcomes. The first scenario that we did, we went severe and likely. So it's a high risk, so we're not putting them in our facility. The second one, let's flip it around and do a different scenario where we don't see any pieces of this in our in any of our records. The testing comes back. We've got a COA or a certificate of compliance for food contact. We've got it on a daily check of a form. What would the rate be? What would the rating be for that one? How is it different?
It's going to be medium, right? Because it's still the same end risk, but we're not seeing any situations where it's occurring.
Yeah. So we're going to move to a medium risk, which means yes, we can use it, but we're going to put some more controls in. We're going to beef up our system to control those to control those potential risks or hazards. The last thing we want is to do this and that let's throw a dart at it and all right, we're low risk and we'll just go ahead and do it. The unintended consequences can be severe, right? That's the big thing with this. I'm not sure. Do you think it would ever get to a low risk?
No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think that would be an incredible stretch. As an auditor, I would have some serious challenges for that one, and I'm not sure there's enough records to prove that a low risk would be.
Let's put it this way, just a suggestion. In the event, let's say your production lines are completely sealed, nothing, even if the pieces fall, they will never get into the product.
Right.
Will that be considered a low risk? Because everything goes through the system, sealed through capsules, like drinkings and fresh juice, for example, and they're covered before they go to the packaging, before they are outside of the sealed environment. For us, for example, in that case, then even if it fell into, it won't get into the product because they are not accessible.
Wonderful. Yes. Does everybody agree with that? Would that would be a low risk, right?
That would be low for
Actually a low risk.
likelihood.
Yeah,
But it
low risk.
doesn't, that wouldn't change your severity, right? So your likelihood would be unlikely, but your severity would still be elevated because if it was to be in the product, the concern's still there.
So the likelihood of it getting in the product is unlikely. And then your severity, would you rate it as severe? If you're in a sealed system and it would potentially be intentional at that point, right?
Well, the severity is based on if it, in the absence of control. So if you have a
Right.
1-inch piece of
That's
zip
true.
tie in the bottle of juice,
Yeah.
then I would think that that would still be an elevated risk.
Okay, that's a fair point too. So we can get to a medium. Adam, I think that's great. That's a good point to capture there. So that's where you see that it really comes down to every facility is different. Al, that's a great example. Every facility is different, and you know we've had a scope here that we can kind of generally apply to most facilities. The risks, I think we did a great job identifying what the risks are, potential risks are. The records is a big one, right? That's connecting to your system. Now, does this affect any other program in your food safety system?
Preventative maintenance for sure.
Yeah, it's potentially going to affect your preventive maintenance and all of those areas that you may have to beef up. So it's going to add to your program. So if you added them in without realizing that it affects these 2 or 3 other ones, what are the unintended consequences there? Somebody could get hurt, right?
Yeah.
Or recall. Knock on wood. I don't even like saying that word out loud. That's a dirty word right there.
Non-conformance on your audit.
Right. It could be a non-conformance on your audit. So what other questions should we ask here? I think we've got, we've got pretty much, we've decided it's a medium to high risk here. And we've identified what the risks are. I'm going to actually stop sharing and I'm going to write those in. I'm going to be a bit of a keener here and see if we can write those in. Where did that go? So risks for material. Any other comments with the zip ties? Anything else that we missed? Any other risks? Or would you make the outcomes different?
So just a comment about that. Since zip ties are used outside the product, does they still need to be the certificate of compliance from their suppliers? Any with the product zip ties, they are outside the product, outside the packaging. They do not have any.
You're breaking up. I can't hear. Can't hear what's going on. If you could type it into the chat. Ben, do we have anything from the chat?
Yeah, there is. Mira is asking, do you look at severity or likelihood first? And maybe we could, maybe that guest could mute for a moment. Thank you. The question was, do you look at severity or likelihood first? And does the order potentially change the rating based off the order you look at these categories in?
So that's a good question. So I think that's a great question. So if we looked at severity first, likelihood doesn't necessarily change, right? Or if we look at likelihood first, severity doesn't necessarily change, because we're investigating both of these things through records, through risks, through all of those things. We're looking at all of those things in this bucket. You're almost doing them simultaneously, but to identify likelihood, I mean, you can do them together. You can do likelihood first. You can do severity second. That's my thoughts on it. Is the way that we get to what the risk is doesn't change if we do likelihood or severity first. What does the group think? Throwing it out to the group.
For me, it's always been likelihood or severity. It's just how you think of the next one is what impacts the previous, your answer. So if you consider likelihood, then that might consider how you look at the next one, but they've always been hand in hand in the order for me.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else? I think that's a great comment.
I think there was a comment about the using the scoring the actual, you know, the risk, because you may, if I look at it from just a pure safety aspect, you may have a severity that's high, but if likelihood of it not happening is really low, it doesn't mean you can't do that procedure or do that process. And I look at maybe something like the gentleman that talked about a can. If I have a product that once the can is, or the product's in the can is sealed, and then it goes into a package, the packers that may, you know, produce the carton the can goes in, are they allowed, can they have zip ties because the can's sealed? And even if a zip tie gets into a carton, it's not from a food safety risk, it's, it would be lower because it's not inside the can, it's on, you know, outside. Can I have zip ties in the packer area, but not at the filler area?
Yeah, so it is something that we would have to further investigate, right? That is something that we would have to dive a little bit deeper into. And that's sometimes what we find in these things is it's not always black and white. And this is kind of my comment to, let's keep it simple, but let's understand what the big picture is, what your whole picture at your facility is, what the reality is at your facility, and base it on that. So I think those are fair comments for sure.
There was another comment, Jeff, that zip ties are, excuse me, in some cases, not using a zip tie to secure something would increase the risk to product by having an unsecured item.
Ah, okay. Hey, look at that. I like that. That's really really interesting thinking. So that again, it brings that big picture into play with, you know, do we put zip ties or not? And that's the other side of it, is if we don't, then this could potentially fall down, or because I mean, let's be honest here. It's usually maintenance tying something up with a zip tie that we see, right? It's not. It's usually that's usually the application that we're seeing. So.
There's another comment, zip ties are outside packaging and may not have direct contact with product. Does this still need COC from suppliers?
So again, everybody's going to look at, you got to look at everything. So it's based on your situation. You determine what that is. So if that gets into your product, or if you find it's used in an application, you know, those are some of the reasons. There's some of the things you could potentially run into if you don't have one. You know, if you don't need it, or you determine you don't need it, then there's no, you know, you have to make sure that you've looked at the risk of not using the certified one versus the actual certified one.
There's another question. From an inspection standpoint, do you leave the zip tie intact when used, or should the excess be cut off?
These are interesting questions. What does the group think? So, I mean,
I think though it should be left intact, because if you find it downstream in your process, you don't know if the part broke off or not.
Okay, that's a good point, Brad.
Yeah, you will know if it's broken off if it's not intact.
The only problem with that, if you leave hanging pieces, is that it tend to collect dust over time, and that become much more obvious to the auditor that there's a lot of dust around that hanging piece, rather than if you cut it.
Yes, Al, I agree. And then if that dust is allergenic, then we run into a bit of a different issue, right?
Yeah, depending on what you use a twist tie for.
Yeah.
Also, if you trim it properly, if anything breaks off, the whole piece is coming off. Whereas if you leave a piece hanging, you can have a piece break off without it being obvious, because it would still be holding whatever it is holding.
Yeah.
Just want to weigh in a little bit on this. Regarding zip tie, there are specific zip ties for the food processing industry as well. So, I mean, you can buy it specifically for food processing, where they are they are metal detectable as well. They're as well to meet the requirements. They're non-allergenic and so on as well. So there is a number of options there to mitigate the risk, but the other side of it is depending on how much of a preventive controls that you put in place as well, depending on the operation, like what Al said as well, whether it's a juice industry and so on. So there's a lot of variables and a lot of things to consider, even to get into the evaluation process as well. Anyway,
Yes.
just my 2 cents worth.
Yep, no, you're absolutely right. And that's why I focused on you need to make it applicable for your facility. There is no, I wish there was a silver bullet. It would be nice if we could just say, okay, here's your cookie cutter risk assessment for this. There you go. But you know, it's the process. I enjoyed the conversation. This is great. You guys were really good. I think.
Alrighty, so let's talk about air hand dryers. So these questions, so legit questions that we get is, how can, SQF doesn't like trees, that's why you require paper towels and, all that kind of stuff. And even the 18 inches from the wall, we get that question a lot. Does it have to be 18 inches in the wall? Do I have to have buttons instead? Can I use snaps instead of buttons? Or does my top pocket need to be zipped and, sewn up, all that kind of stuff? And I always say, I don't know, you tell me, right? So what I want to do is, so we pick these ones on purpose. So the biggest one we get is about air hand dryers. Can we use air hand dryers instead of paper towels? Because in the code, it is specific. You have to have a means to dry your hands, but it has to be a paper towel. So we are risk based, right? We try not to be prescriptive. We try to be risk based. So you can use alternative methods, which means based off a risk assessment, you can demonstrate that an air hand dryer can be just as effective as a paper towel. And here's why. But we believe at SQF, and there's science to back that up, that a paper towel is effective because it's more effective in that friction wipes off any of that microflora or anything that's on there. So it's an added measure for keeping hands clean. However, if you can address those particular risks with use of an air hand dryer, and you can use that instead of a paper towel. So the scope is your production manager, or maybe the sustainability manager was like, hey, we want to use air hand dryers instead of paper towels. And you're saying, well, the SQF code says we can't. Well, let's see if it's, viable to do that. So if we want to use air hand dryers instead of paper towels, first step, let's discuss the risks. What would be some of those risks to using an air hand dryer? Anybody? You could chat it in. You can just put yourself off mute. You can.
It's blowing germs everywhere.
Pardon me?
It's blowing germs everywhere.
Yeah, so it's the airflow, right? The airflow, contaminated air. Well, the airflow would bounce back up, right? Is that what you're saying? Like all of a sudden I'm blowing it and it's just going to blow everything. So the recirculated as well as any of the airflow, right? Contamination from the airflow. Great. That's a good one.
Jennifer McCreary has my favorite one. It says it takes too long to dry the hands and people use their frocks or their lab coats, right? Who's ever seen that, right?
Oh, always.
Especially during breaks.
Yep.
Dry their hands.
Also the moisture that is left behind when the air dryer blows the water off onto the ground, that's, it's pretty much a lot of bacteria, and then you can easily drag that around.
Oh, on the environment. Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yeah.
The ground, right underneath.
All the floor, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Good one. What
It's
else?
also a mechanical device which could fail.
Ah, I never heard that one before.
I never thought of that one. That's the one that we have not thought of. That's a good one. Yeah, it could. And it's a mechanical device. It certainly could.
Yep. What else? my favorite one is there's never enough air hand dryers. Never. You grab a paper towel and you're walking and going, right? And you're drying your hands and it's like a continuous flow, but there's never enough air hand dryers. You have people waiting there for 20 seconds and then the next person, they're not going to wait. I mean, it just goes back to what Jennifer said. It takes too long. So to me, there's never enough air hand dryers.
Got a couple more in the chat. It says putting wet hands into gloves.
Oh,
yeah. You know, well, one, the gloves never go on, right? You know, and then a reduced risk of having waste paper towels all over the place.
Yeah.
You know, germy paper towels. What are some of the other ones? Hands aren't fully dry. You know, kind of making that moist environment to allow transient bacteria growth, creating aerosols not as quick as a paper towel. I think most of them might be.
So you can see some of the ones that we talked about. Anybody else have anything? Let me see if I can't make this. No.
There's a higher possibility of people skipping in line because they're waiting too long.
Interesting
webinar
going on.
Yep.
Oh, is that what you're doing right now?
You got to keep your training up.
Oh, you're learning, are you?
Yeah, well, not really. I think you already know what I'm doing.
And mute because there's somebody not muted. So.
Ooh.
Okay. Okay.
I have an alternative here because, you know, all of these risks, there's some new air dryers that dry your hands a little faster and they do it within the sink, more like a Dyson air knife, and they have HEPA filters. So I guess would the risk still be there if you're taking into consideration the HEPA filter, the location of the dryer, and the time of the newer air dryers?
Right. And those were things that we could, so these are the risks that you're saying. Exactly. And then we could, if we could buy one, like if one of these air hand dryers addresses all these risks, that would lower our risk, right? If we could do that. Okay, so let's just take a look at some records we would want to review. So what would be some of the records we would want to review that would kind of support what direction we're going to go in?
How about hand swabbing?
Hand swabs? Yeah.
For sure, GMP records to see if anyone's been seen not washing their hands regularly.
Yep, your daily GMP records. Yep.
Yeah, internal audit data.
Internal audit data. Yep. Yep. So we look at hand swabs, GMP records, internal audit data. What else did I
Interview
training
people too.
Pardon me?
Interview people too.
Your environment.
Oh yeah.
Environmental swabs.
Your environmental swabs, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Environmental swabs. Your water bacteriology as well.
I'm just going to put EMP swabs because I'm not in the mood to spell environmental. I was also looking at training and complaints. I thought those would be kind of helpful as well.
We got PM on the dryer, preventive maintenance on the dryer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, or that all of your sink facilities. Sanitation.
Yeah. Oh, sanitation records.
Your daily hygiene records. Yeah,
Yep.
for release of the if you have any mechanic reoccurrences with specifically.
Yeah. So based off of all of this, let's say it comes back and some of this there wasn't a lot, or just evaluating all this, kind of putting it in your where you are in your site, what would be your risk level? So would it be like the likelihood of contamination? What would be the likelihood of contamination from the airflow, or people not drying their hands, or reduce, waiting too long? Let's say that, hand swabs, etc. Using all this data, what would be the likelihood if we were to use air hand dryers instead of paper towels, the likelihood that these risks would occur? What do you think? Medium, low?
Got a bunch of mediums in the chat. I think
Yeah,
almost everyone said medium.
So a medium I would agree. I was going to say medium.
Wouldn't we have to like set a quantitative amount to them to suggest if you get 3 of this, that would be low. If you get 5 of this, that would be medium. That's the impression I got from the slides earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying if we could, I don't have that on here because I didn't get that on this particular thing, but it would have been helpful if we had just identified what would be considered a medium risk. So if we had identified that, a low risk, a medium risk, and a high risk. So if I would say, typically you are identifying here, like if there's more than 5 risks, it's going to be a medium risk, or between 1 and 3, it would be low, between 4 and 6, it would be medium, etc. If these had occurred. So let's just say, yep, there is contamination, the airflow dryer that we have, and people won't dry their hands, etc. So if you are least likely to occur, then that could be a medium. And then what if they didn't dry their hands properly? Because basically what we're saying here is that it's the recontamination of your hands. So what if they didn't dry their hands? They washed their hands properly, but this is just basically they're not drying their hands properly. What would be the likelihood or the severity of them not drying their hands properly and recontaminating?
I would say low, just because the only risk would be some water activity and keeping the bacteria alive. But most facilities have sanitizers in every workstation and require gloves to even handle food and sanitize gloves. So
I would
it
also
would be
say one of the things we didn't consider is location. So is this in the bathroom or is this in the production area? Because that would be, I think, would lower the likelihood and the severity. So stay with me, is if it's only in the bathroom where these are, the individual has to go back to their workstation and wash their hands prior to going to work. And that would be using the station with a paper towel. Right. So there could be just where that location is could lower or raise the likelihood and the severity of it occurring.
It would be higher risk if it's in
Would it also
hygiene
be based off if it's a dry?
Yep. And it would, so there's a lot
I'm sorry, would it also be based off if it's a dry work environment or a wet work environment?
It would, absolutely. And there are a lot of assumptions because we all, like somebody is chatting in, is there in the dryer? Is it, we can't have it in the, you can't have it in the production area, which is, true. I've never seen one in the production area, but again, it would all depend where you're working and what kind of environment you're in. So if this is just, if the scope is, so let's narrow this scope. Let's narrow this scope right now. Can we use air hand dryers instead of paper towels for the bathrooms or toilet areas? Do we want to narrow this scope? Because it's really not, it's not going to be used in the production area, right? So
I've seen them used in production areas in multiple facilities as an alternative. And I mean, to me, our first risk is more focused on hand washing and not the drying part. The contamination in the air, what we're blowing into the air. If we're washing our hands improperly, that's where the risk can come from. But I mean, I've seen air dryers in numerous production facilities in the production area as you enter.
Yeah, and I think it all depends on the type of the location that you're at. It depends on the product and the process. So do we want to narrow our scope? Like, because that I think would depend on the severity, it really would depend on the severity. So what do you guys think? Severity, medium or low? I don't know if it would be high. Christy, what is the chat?
I'm looking. I think we had a bunch of folks saying hi when you first posed it.
What do you guys think? High, medium, low. Let's see. Let's do
hi. Lots of highs.
High, medium.
Okay, now we have a change of heart. We have medium. And I'll put in a vote for medium.
Yeah.
This would depend on the facility, the risk rating, the product. I mean,
Let's say, and that's why I thought, should we narrow this scope for the purpose of this exercise? Should we narrow the scope to just putting it in the bathrooms, just so that I think could.
No.
To me, if we put it in the bathroom, you're going to wash your hands as soon as you enter the production area. So, you know,
it's kind of moot.
I don't know if you would have a risk assessment for it in the bathroom if you're requiring hand washing again.
Okay,
at a
what
later
else?
step before you enter GMP.
Yeah.
Every facility has their hand washing station.
Okay, please do
immediately
production
prior to
area.
entering them.
Okay.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, we're gonna do production areas. And so what would you guys think then? Now we're talking medium to high risk, correct? Oh, and somebody else said, oh, okay. Oh, you need a decision. High.
Yeah, I think we'll go and you know, I think you know, you're like you said earlier, Leanne, you're looking at your risks, like what are all the risks? And that may dictate the kind of air dryer you choose, if you know, you know what I'm saying ultimately. And two, it's not just dictating whether or not you're determining, you know, is there a hand dryer that could minimize some of these risks and we can still use the hair dryer anyway. So maybe we can assume we really just want one of those jet fueled air dryers that just blow the bejesus out of your hands.
Let's just go medium and medium. Is that all you? So if it's a high risk, then I think. Are you guys all in agreement with medium to medium? Raised hands.
Yeah, we got medium high.
Thumbs ups. Yeah, I'd say medium. Here, I'll go like. Oh wait, hold on. Sorry. I'll do like this. A medium high risk. So we'll go like this.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Knowing that
I would agree. If it's in the production area, then it would be medium to high.
Risk. And like our contributor earlier said that maybe there's some with the HEPA filter, and it's not so much the air blowing out.
And I think
air blowing into the environment.
That would be our outcome. So now what we've identified is all of these potential risks, people not washing their hands. We're talking about the airflow contamination. We're talking all about this. So the outcome would be, what would be looking at all these potential risks and the records reviewed and looking at the location, all of that, what would be your outcome? Would you say, no, we're not going to use air hand dryers if we can't control these risks, specifically, you know, with the, you know, moisture, or we would allow air hand dryers as long as the air hand dryer had, you know, the HEPA filter, it was contained in a particular area, there was air hand dryers sufficient enough for the staff, there was GMP daily checks added on, you know, would we agree to all of that? Your guys are still saying no.
We still say no.
Cost of installation. So you're saying we would say no to installing air hand dryers in the production area because of the risks. We can't control these risks. Is that what our overall outcome is? We're going to present to the group? Correct. Okay. Yeah. Everybody, I need thumbs up. Christy, check the thumbs up.
Oh, let me see if I can find those.
I would like a thumbs up from everybody.
I'm seeing some just a handful of thumbs as far as, wait, the thumb is, Tracy's got 2 thumbs. Let's see. Not a lot of thumbs. Okay, so the thumbs are Not
simple
recommending
paper towels. Everybody's like, just keep it simple.
Just use the paper towels. Yeah.
So like, let's just say, okay, so let's just say, just to kind of, okay, so this is what we're going to do. So from the auditor's perspective, this is what the auditor would be looking for if you did install air hand dryers in production. This is what the auditor would be looking for. They're going to say, okay, where's your risk assessment? You're using an air hand dryer over paper towels. So how did you identify the risks? How did you look at that? Who did you talk to? What's, your potential scope? And I think what we needed to do is expand this scope. And of course, like Jeff said, it's different for everybody. It's definitely different for everybody. And I'm going to highlight that so they would say these risks. And if you decided, yes, I'm going to use air hand dryers because my location is dry, there isn't any risk, or, whatever it might be. And I don't need to worry about environmental concerns, etc., or recontamination because I bought this type of air hand dryer. It's contained. I monitor, etc. So that's what the outcome would. That's what the auditor is looking for when they're looking at alternative methods. We're not looking for 25-page dissertation with footnotes and a bibliography. It's just a simple. It's a simple identification and using a risk matrix that says, here's the scope, this is the question, here's the risks that we looked at, here's why we chose it is because it addresses these risks, and this is how we monitor it.
We do have some concerns in the chat that what happens if your auditor doesn't agree? I think my first impression would be I need a little more detail from you, Mr. or Ms. Auditor. What do you disagree with? Yeah.
Any alternative methods or exemption within the SQF code has to be submitted prior to your audit. So it gives the auditor the opportunity to say, I need more information on this one. So that's that. But you can use this risk assessment just like Jeff did in the main room, where he said, can I scoot these pallets a little bit further back? Because we're going to add more pallets, and we can't now fit let's say the idea is now I can't fit my forklift in between because we need to add a whole nother row of pallets. Let's just say across from it. So if we scoot it back now sometime, let me see what happens. So what he did is he looked at where are the pallets stored, what kind of activity is there for pest control, sanitation, etc. And he decided, we could scoot them back a little bit. So if the auditor is coming in and saying, how come your pallets are 9 inches instead of 18 inches? One, it's not in the code, so you don't really have to justify, but you could say, I did a risk assessment, and here's what we found is that we could still do sufficient amount of cleaning. We can still monitor for pest control. We see that there aren't any issues. We've been monitoring it, and that's why we have pushed it to that. So that's one of the instances where they could say, hey, how did you determine this? How did you determine that you're going to, do monitor check, or how come you decided to use snaps instead of, buttons, or how come you're so, that kind of stuff. So they could be looking at that during the audit. But if you are submitting something as an alternative control, such as this example, air hair dryers instead of paper towels, then you would need to submit this prior to your audit. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, so D Garcia says he's asking, or she's asking, do we need to call attention to these issues before the audit? So yes, this is submitted prior to the audit. You're submitting your evidence prior to the audit. Whether that discussion isn't going to take place prior, it's going to be taking place during the audit, right, Leanne?
You're going to talk to your certification body prior to, and if this is something like your SQF, years 1, 2, and 3, and then the 4th year you decided, hey, we're going to switch to air hand dryers because Dyson has made a really good has made a really good comeback, and you're going to switch it, then you're going to go to your CB and say, hey, we're doing an alternative method. So we're going to close in 30 seconds. So we're going to do an alternative method, and you're going to submit that to the CB ahead of time. And then it could be this, one-page document to say, hey, we're using an alternative method for air hand dryers instead of paper towels. Here's my risk assessment. And then the CB should get back to you and say, okay, this is sufficient amount of information. So they're going to look at that risk assessment. Then
Really
they're going to
I think our time is starting to, our time is up. So we're going to get back together as a group. Thank you very much. This was great interaction, great engagement. I really, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now we're going to bring the whole group back together.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm going to take a shot of Diet Pepsi here to calm my... Andrew, I'm assuming you're bringing everyone back together.
Yeah, everyone should be back. I think we're quite a 30-second countdown.
Okay.
Yep. I'm back. Everyone's back.
Okay, everybody's back. All right, welcome back, everyone. So what I'd like to do now is just a final kind of get together on how was that? How was the risk assessment, getting together in your rooms? How did you make it through the entire risk assessment? Did we, Leanne, Tammy, can you guys maybe give some feedback on what we've seen in the other two rooms?
Yes, we actually filled out the little form you gave us. So do you want me to share my screen or?
Yes, that'd be great.
Right. Okay, hold on. We had such a great crowd. I am not going to lie. I think I had the best room from everybody.
I would challenge you on that one.
Me too.
Okay. So, okay, here, let me share. Hopefully, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty. So what we did, and if I don't know if we can raise our hands, can people raise their hands? Can you raise your hand if you were in my chat, in my breakout room? Just raise your hand. Thanks. Yeah, look at, see how many cool people I had. Did you guys have many cool people? Okay, so our question was, can you use air hand dryers instead of paper towels? And that was just the generic question. But then, you know what, Jeff, as we were going through the scope, we realized we needed to expand our scope, because can you just use them in the toilet areas or in the production areas, or, what was the big question here? Because that identified different risks depending on where the air hand dryers were. So we expanded our scope to say we needed to identify. At first, I was going down the easy route. I'm like, can we use them in the bathrooms? Somebody's like, no, let's go into. I was like, okay, challenge accepted. So we did it in the production areas, and we came up with some super cool risks, right? So contamination from the airflow, which we know takes too long, and people dry them on their frocks. Too much moisture left behind, like in the environment, not just on the hands, but also in the environment. So it would make a difference if you're like a completely dry environment and you're exposing air hand dryers. Are you exposing a risk, introducing a environmental risk, right? Mechanical failure. Paper towels don't fail, right? Mechanical failure. What if your air hand dryer fails? There's never enough air hand dryers, and that was my Achilles heel, is that there's only one air hand dryer and 20 people to dry their hands. And then also just recontamination, putting wet hands into gloves. But there was a couple ones that said, hey, there's a reduced risk of contaminated paper towels just floating around the site anyway. So could be a pro. And then waiting too long to dry your hands, and also location. Location was key when you're really looking at those risks. And those are things that we couldn't just assume. So we reviewed hand swabs, GMP records, internal audits. We did some interviews, EMP swabs, training, complaints, preventive maintenance, sanitation. So these were some of the records. And we decided it would be medium to a medium high risk. And so our outcome, Jeff, is we would not recommend air hand dryers for the production area.
Wow, that's surprising.
I know.
I'm shocked. Oh my goodness. Wow. And you totally went with a blank slate, right? Like we're just looking at the data here. Good. That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's what we decided. I thought, like I said, it was such a very good conversation we had, and we were just kept talking and talking. But anyways,
good.
So Tammy, go ahead, or Tammy or Jeff, you guys can.
All right, I'm going to share mine. Let's see. Let me get my right screen up here. Okay, so we did not get through, and I know everyone that knows me is not shocked by the fact that I did not get through because I'm a talker. So, you know, we had lots to talk about. So, but we did make a good list. So trying to get it up. Hopefully everybody's seeing my screen. So can we drink water in food production areas? So, the biggest risk, obviously, contamination here. So we just started making a list. So water and product. So even though it's not a natural contaminant, there could be, there's always the potential for the, you know, the source where the water came from to be contaminated. So we still wanted to consider that as a contamination. Concern with individuals who are sick passing on a disease. So someone's drinking right there at the production line. Maybe they're not aware that they have a norovirus or something like that. So there is the potential for that water to be contaminated by the individual who's drinking it, and it could be passed along into the food product if it were contaminated. Quality issues also a concern as well there. Foreign material risk from the container. So does the container have a top on it that could come off, or pieces that could chip off? Also, you're going to be handling the bottle with your gloves on, or with your hands. Or are you going to contaminate your gloves or your hands that would then in turn contaminate the product? Then we moved into things like spillage and creating sanitation concerns, damage to any packaging that may be, you know, if products being packed into a case, you know, and the cardboard were to get wet, you know, that could be damaging to the packaging. The spillage, the other concerns. Spillage also, if you drop down to number 9, would get into the safety. And so we emphasized at this point that, you know, while we're doing a food safety risk assessment, it's always great to include other people from the site team to address concerns such as safety, because it's going to have an impact to that program as well as your food safety program. So that was another risk. Allergen contamination. So, you know, one of our participants said they have a no allergen facility. So, you know, are those water bottles going to be carried to the break room where they eat their peanut butter sandwich and then carry that water bottle back out into the production area? And then raw and ready to eat zone. So you work in a factory where you have both raw and ready to eat. Are people moving in between those two areas, and they could contaminate ready to eat product by bringing something from the raw area? Then we also talked about intentional contamination. So not everybody would be, you know, doing the honest thing, the right thing, and drinking, you know, water there. So maybe there is some intentional contamination that needs to be considered. And then regulatory requirements. Are there anything in regulatory that would put us at risk if we were to implement this? So we had quite the extensive list. And then we moved into what records we would review. So we had illness logs, we had GMP inspections, we had previous incident reports, non-conformance reports or customer complaints, foreign material logs where we've identified that is a potential issue, water test records, talked about our glass and brittle plastic records, any disciplinary actions for GMP violations, and any training records that we might want to take a look at. And then we got to the severity risk. We decided was pretty severe with having water at the workstation. So we got there, and then we had just started talking about likelihood when we got cut off. So we didn't set our likelihood level, but we had already identified some outcomes that were coming up as we were brainstorming. So we just started parking lotting those at the end. So, you know, we talked about water bottles. You know, we wouldn't want you to bring any old water bottle from home. You know, we would probably want to issue the water bottles if we determined that the risk assessment was such that we could do those water bottles. So we would want to issue those water bottles by the site, and then also some way of identifying those water bottles in case a water bottle got missed or there was an issue there. So we didn't get all the way through it, but we got pretty close before we got cut out.
Okay, that is, I really enjoy how all of these, one question bubbles up into another one, you know, I can see the comments coming in. These are great. This is really, really what a roundtable is all about. That's the true definition of what a roundtable, really is. And, so I'm going to share my screen and go through. So I'm glad that we had as much participation as we did. So for us, great participation. Can you guys see my screen?
Hey, Jeff, I just want to say we're a little bit behind. So
okay.
We're about 4 minutes over, which is fine.
All right.
But if hopefully y'all can just hang on there. Jeff's gonna go through his roundtable. We'll conclude, and then hang on for trivia. So we have one quick fun game where everybody get to win a prize. Tammy, show them your swag. You can get win some swag from the SQF gift store. So yeah.
All right.
So hang on for trivia, and we'll go through Jeff's and then do our proper thank yous and goodbyes, and then hopefully you guys can hang on. So
all right, so I will talk very quickly on this. I had an awesome group. They were firing things out faster than I could write them down. So my slide doesn't necessarily do it justice. I apologize, team. I let you down a little bit. I was paying attention, engaged in what we were talking about. Some of the risks for material, pathogen growth on the zip ties, leaching chemicals from there, allergens, physical hazards. Some of the records that we would look at: metal detector checks, temporary repairs, complaints, master sanitation schedule, PM program, changeovers, glass and brittle plastic.
Jeff, are you sharing your slide, or are you just going over it?
Oh, I thought okay. I was sharing.
Yep, there's nothing shared.
Okay, well, let me try again. Can you guys see now?
Nope.
Oh, this share screen is, oh, I see. Okay. So, sorry,
now we can.
My Zoom is, my Zoom, I'm not very good at Zoom. Okay, we're back.
Yep.
So, you know, we looked at it from many different levels, and there were some really great comments. One of the big comments that came out here was, what would happen if we didn't use zip ties in production? That was really one of those kind of aha moments of, hey, we're looking at it from we're using zip ties, but that was one of those kind of, oh, that kind of sends us down a bit of a different path. So I loved the conversation, the ideas and the different, hey, you know, what is this and this and this? We looked at it, and we come out medium risk or high risk in most cases, which would allow us to not use it in the high, but in the medium, we would use the zip ties in some circumstances with elevated levels. So beefing up our records to reflect that we're inspecting. If there's allergen issues, we'll put it into a changeover procedure, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really good discussion. It was great. I like that that the group was as engaged as they were. It was really nice to work through that as a group.
Thanks. Okay, that was fantastic. Good job. There's some questions, but I don't hands up. Oh, I think those are from my awesome people are still have their hands up.
They're still waving.
Yes. Well, thank you all for a wonderful session. This was a really great breakout session, and there's a lot of questions in the chat, but mainly people wanted to know if they would get a copy of the slides. And so I believe Jeff will be sending everybody a copy of these slides, as well as I know I sent you my slide to my breakout, and then Tammy will send you her slide to her breakout, and you'll have that as well as your,
Great.
Yep. And with that, I want to thank Jeff and NSF for hosting this roundtable. It was a really great question that I think everybody needs to know the answer to, is how to conduct a risk assessment, because it's not just about, it's about how you would, whether you're going to buy this or that, or go here or there, or put your pallet racks 9 inches or 18 inches, and why 18 inches, right? So it does look and explore the different aspects of risks and how to apply them into your facility. So thank you, Jeff. I really do appreciate it. Any closing thoughts or anything you want us to leave with?
No, this was really fun. I want to thank everybody for showing up. I enjoyed my time with each and every one of you. This was really fun.